Today is Rosh Chodesh Av, or as they say, Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av. It's the beginning of the 9 days, and we transfer over from the 3-week period into the 9-day period. The way Rav Soloveitchik learns is we move from Yud Beis Chodesh into the Shloshim period. It's the inverse of the usual, because when you lose a loved one, you usually feel it the most right away, and not that you never forget, but time heals to a certain extent, and therefore Shiva is more intensive than Shloshim, etc. But here we're dealing with old Avelis, not new Avelis, the temple, so therefore it takes us time to work ourselves into the mood to be Noheg Avelis. So therefore we start off slowly with the 3 weeks and then move up to the 9 days. So one of the prohibitions of the 9 days is the prohibition of basar v'yayin. There's a prohibition during the 9 days of eating meat and wine. Of course, with var mitzvah, for mitzvah purposes, it's permitted, i.e. on Shabbos, i.e. if one makes a siyum during the 9 days, then everyone could join in the simcha. There's a general rule, it's a prohibition to have meat and wine. That's why many people turned up the barbecues yesterday, and they had the last bites of meat, at least until then, at least another week, a couple of days, depending when it's going to be. So one of the questions I got yesterday was, what about, and this will also be true for next week because of Shabbos, what about the leftovers? Could I eat, I know I can't barbecue today, but let's say I have leftover ribs, leftover steak. Could I eat the leftovers during the 9 days? Is it the prohibition of the making it fresh? Would it make a difference? So there's a Gemara in Chulin that doesn't talk about leftovers, but we'll tie it into leftovers. The Gemara in Chulin and Daf Yud Zayin talks about, of all things, Kadli de Chazeri, about the special dispensation for the Jewish people to eat non-kosher while they were fighting the 14 years. The 14 years when they were taking over the land of Israel, the 7 years of conquering and the 7 years of chazakah, of settling. So there was a special, we'll get into it more another time, there's a special heter of eating non-kosher food. So Gemara goes through exactly what happened, what about leftover food from the midbar that they had when they went into Eretz Yisrael. Only leftover food. What's the difference? Like, what was kosher before was kosher after? So not so simple. The Gemara tells us the laws of shchita, of slaughtering an animal the way we know it, didn't really apply until the Jews entered the land of Israel. They do shchita the way we do it, or I guess fundamentally the same. However, in the midbar, they didn't have to do a full-fledged shchita. It was basa nechira, different opinions how much they needed, whether they needed something, nothing. But the bottom line, that was permitted in the midbar. But when they entered the land of Israel, they had to do a full-fledged shchita to make the food kosher. The Gemara's question is, what happened if they had leftover meat from the midbar, from the desert, and now they're entering the land of Israel? So from here on in, they have to do the proper slaughtering method for Eretz Yisrael. But what about the food that they slaughtered properly in the desert? Could they bring that food in and eat it in Eretz Yisrael? That's the Gemara's question.
And the pots.
Yeah, I'm saying then.
Because they're bringing the pots in.
Right, so what then?
That they have to dunk the pots or boil them or burn them or something.
Right, that could be part. Right, that could be part of. That would be part of the same shaila. If you could eat the meat, then you could certainly eat them in the pots. So they point out. We just had, and that's what we had a couple of weeks ago. We had the issue of Clay Midjan of the issue of koshering. So, in terms of, of koshering kalim, that something becomes non-kosher. So the Gemara says, Teku. The Gemara says we don't know. We don't have an answer to the kasha. Were the Jews able to eat the leftovers or not? First, the Gemara goes through a whole discussion about which years are we talking about. We're talking about the first 7, the last 7. That we'll get into when we get into Parshas V'eschanan in a couple of weeks. We can discuss that more. But here we'll just focus on the leftover angle. So the Gemara says Teku. So what does Teku mean? So many are taught in yeshiva when you're younger. Teku stands for Taf Yud Kovav Tishbi Yitaretz Kushis Vabayis, meaning Eliyahu Tishbi. Eliyahu Navi will come along and answer up our questions. So we don't have an answer now, but Eliyahu will come along and answer. The Brisker Rav and others say that's not what it means. That's just something you teach the kids. You want them to get ready for the Mashiach. It's just more of a pedagogic method. Really, Teku comes from the word tik, like put away. And put it away, and then when the Mashiach comes, Eliyahu Navi will come and answer your questions. Again, a separate discussion, why Eliyahu? Why not Moshe Rabbeinu? I thought it's Torah's Moshe. Why are we going to Eliyahu Navi for the answer and not for Moshe? So, so some point out, I'll just answer that briefly, is because we know in Torah is dynamic. So you can't just wake up one day living in a vacuum, living in an island, and come and start paskening shiloh. Some questions you can, if it's just a pure ritual question, whether the meat's kosher or not, that might not change. But questions that deal with society and people, that depends a lot on what the reality is. So, as we know, Moshe Rabbeinu has been dead for many years, so it's going to take him a while to wake up and see what's going on. But our tradition, Eliyahu Hanavi is still alive, doesn't come visit you every Pesach, he visits you every Bris Milah. So whatever that means exactly, Eliyahu and Pinchas are still alive, assuming Pinchas knew Eliyahu. And therefore, that's what it means, that someone has to be around to know what's going on. But either way, Eliyahu will come and answer the question. So the Gemara leaves it unresolved. So Rashi says, like, what are we draying around for? Who cares? Why is the Gemara interested? It's not halacha l'maisa. Like, who cares whether you can eat the left? Does anyone have any leftovers from the midbar? Like, why are we asking the question? We don't just stick to hypotheticals. Usually there's a question that has to be answered. Or B, we have many principles we learn up. Why is the Gemara interested? So Rashi is right. There is no halacha l'maisa. It's drush v'kibel schar. It's just Talmud Torah lishma. It's learning Torah for the sake of this understanding the Torah. Nothing practical will come out. Kind of like the discussion the Gemara in Sanhedrin has, let's say, by Ben Sorer or Morer. The Gemara talks about the rebellious child. Well, we all know about rebellious children, but the specific one the Torah is talking about is we really don't have today. It has too many, very tough requirements. Everyone has to, the different technicalities make it almost impossible that this to happen. And therefore the Gemara says, one opinion of the Gemara, that it never was. It's just drush v'kaba. There never was a Ben Sora Morer. We just did it to learn different lessons from it. Or similarly, as the Gemara says, by Ir HaNidachas, the case where the majority of the city is worshipping idols, and you go in and destroy the city again. So opinion says that it didn't happen. So we find this concept of drush v'kibel schar, that you don't necessarily you don't have to have a practical case always. It's nice to have one, but the fact that every question doesn't have to be halacha l'maisa. So that's what Rashi seems to learn, drush v'kabel schar. However, the Rosh doesn't go for that. The Rosh says the Gemara wouldn't be going through this just to telling me drush v'kabel schar. If the Gemara is asking the question, so it's true, we don't have any leftover basar nachira, none that I'm aware of. It might be worth a lot of money today. Wasn't there leftover money in the Beis HaMikdash? But you could go check on eBay, see if you can find any. But either way, the Rosh says, no, even if it's true we don't have any leftover meat, but we can find, there is a halach lamaisa question I could come up with. What's the halach lamaisa question? So he writes, there's another rabbinical prohibition later on in Jewish history. We know we can't drink from the non-Jewish wine. We know yayin, there's yayin, certainly yayin nesach, that was wine that could be done for the wine libations and other things, bishalakam, many things the rabbis set up to try to prevent intermarriage and other things. So one of the prohibitions is gvinas akam. There's a prohibition of having non-kosher cheese. Let me explain non-kosher. That was one of the big issues, maybe it still is, with the conservative movement in terms of that, because the ingredients are kosher. The ingredients are kosher in cheese. When we say non-kosher, I don't mean if you take non-kosher and put it into cheese, then there's nothing to talk about. But I mean all kosher ingredients, but if it's made through a non-Jewish process, there wasn't a mashgiach, there wasn't a Jew there, so there's a rabbinical prohibition that one is not permitted to have this type of cheese. So the Rosh raises the following question. I'll make up the dates and stuff. It's August 1st today. So let's say the rabbis came along and said, you know what? Starting August 1st, you can no longer eat this type of cheese, this type of food, whatever food we want to. Up until now, it's been okay. Because strictly speaking, we're talking about something which is technically kosher, but the rabbis, for whatever reason, whatever their concerns were, they said, at this time, this is no longer, you see under hashgacha now, this is no longer acceptable. They moved the standards up, whatever the case may be. They changed the standards, but the bottom line is, for our cases, something that was considered kosher, and not only was considered, was kosher, and now the rabbis say from this date and onward, you can no longer have it, whatever the reasons. So the question was, so let's say you had one of those big 5-pounders of American cheese, Miller cheese, or whatever they make them now, different brands. So could I eat the leftover cheese from before the Gzeira? Obviously it was purely kosher. The rabbis came along and said, we're not saying the ingredients aren't kosher, for whatever the preventions are, you can no longer eat it. So the question was, you can't go ahead and make new cheese like that, or eat new cheese that was made this way. What about cheese that was made before August 1st? So is that permitted to eat? So the Rosh says, that seems to be the issue in this Gemara here. The Gemara says it's a tekel, we're unsure, so it's unresolved. So the Rosh says, okay, it's unresolved, it's true, but we have many different Talmudic principles to work with when we have something which is unresolved. And one of the basic principles we've discussed I'm not going to say hundreds of times, maybe it has been over the many years, it wouldn't surprise me if it was, but the principle of Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra, a doubt regarding a biblical law was strict on, Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula, a doubt regarding a rabbinic law was strict on. So the Rosh say, you're right, when it comes to the case of the Midbar, Basar, Nechi, we're talking about treif meat, we're dealing with a biblical law, so Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra. But here we're talking about Gvinas Akum, we're talking about a rabbinical decree on something which is biblically kosher. So the Rosh says, Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula, there's no problem, you can continue eating, you can finish your 5 pounds of cheese, and then you can move on to the next. That's what the Rosh says. So comes along, someone had a question?
No.
So comes along the Chidah and takes it to the next step. So the Gemara talks about Basar Nechira, this type of meat that was slaughtered before the way they did it in the Midbar. The Rosh talks about Gvinas Akum. The Rosh talks about cheese that was, the rabbi said was prohibited. So comes along the Chidah and raises our question. What about leftover meat from yesterday's barbecue or from Shabbos? So we know there's a prohibition of having meat and wine during the 9 days. Again, it's a form of Avelis, but it's not really Avelis, because let me ask you something. Is an Ava allowed to have Basar V'Yayin?
On Shabbat?
No, ever.
Yes.
So the answer is, of course, of course, the answer is yes. And in fact, not only can he have, it's an onain that can't have. Someone before the burial, then you can't have basar v'yayin. In fact, Chazal tell us one of the purposes of wine was created to menachem avol. It's to give an avol could have a drink. It's nothing wrong with that. Maybe it's a good thing. So let me just point out, these halachas aren't necessarily a din of avelis. It's part of the Mishnah and Tainis, Misha nichnas ab matim b'simcha. Wine and meat bring simcha, and we do things that minimize our joy, but it's not really a strict din of avelis. It has nothing to do with avelis per se, because we do eat wine and we do drink wine and eat meat when we're in avel. So the Chida writes, what about leftover meat from Shabbos, some cholent that people were trying to get rid of, or other types of schnitzel, or from the barbecue yesterday, the leftover ribs from the men's club dinner, or wherever, could we eat them during the 9 days? So the Chida writes, he quotes the Gemara in Chulin, and then he quotes the Rosh and says, this is even better, because the din of the Chulin, that was a din daraisa. The din by Gvinas Akam, that's a real din darabanan. The 9 days, that's just a minute. Bidina Gemara, really, it's Shua Shachalbo. The week of Tisha B'Av is the first time the Gemara talks about the prohibition in terms of Inyani Avelis, the week of Tisha B'Av. But the 9 days is it's a lower form of the Durabanan. So he says, if the Rosh says that Gvinas Akam is good, is not, if that regular cheese you can eat, then certainly eating leftovers during the 9 days are not a problem. So does that mean, am I saying we could go out? So why were you giving out your leftover? However, as you might have guessed or not, the Chida is not the accepted opinion. It's a minority view, and it's rejected by many, if not all. Why al pisvara? Logically, why would you reject it? What don't you like about the comparison to leftovers to 9 days to, let's say, the case of the cheese? Could you come up with any distinctions?
Well, there's a purpose behind not eating the meat during the 9 days, because you're not supposed to be festive. So whether they're leftovers or freshly cooked, it's likely going to have that festive effect.
I know one could argue leftovers don't taste it.
No, they're better. They're always better.
Oh, you are? Okay. I guess, because in America, people don't eat leftovers on a good day. People throw out one. I'm saying, no, here, if it's showing, it's definitely better because the bones get cooked. But I'd say, as a general, most people would say that eating it fresh is better. But I hear you what you're saying, but I'm saying I could argue that was probably the Chida's svara also, that it's probably not as good. But I guess he didn't know the way you make leftovers. I guess it depends. If you have it well done the first time, the leftovers are not good afterwards, it becomes burnt. But if you like a medium rare, so we can get into that. But anyone else? So perhaps we suggest, to me, it seems to be an obvious distinction for the following reason. So what's the case either by the basa and the chira, by the meat in the midbar, by the cheese? So whatever it is, the Torah, the rabbis came along and said, this cheese or this meat is no longer going to be permitted. It's not that we're saying for the next week, for the next 2 weeks you can't have it, but afterwards we're coming on. This is it. It's a takana, and therefore we're saying it's us. So we have a principle in halacha called. It's not the same. I'm just borrowing the principle to explain it here. It's called davar sheyeshlo matirin. There's a principle in halacha called something which will later on become permitted. In other words, we have halachas of bittul, and nullification. If some little milk falls into the chicken soup, or other types of laws, non-kosher fall in, so we have rules of nullification. So there's a principle, if something which is a davar sheyeshlo matirin, so we don't apply the laws of bittul. We don't apply the law, again, there are many details, but as a general rule, we don't apply the rules of bittul nullification. Why not? Because as the rabbis tell us, why nullify something? Why rely on bittul? Well, if you wait another week or 2 weeks, it's to become permitted. So something that's going to become permitted on its own, why rely on nullification? So over here, by the case of the 9 days, so number one, you could wait until Shabbos. You could wait, at least now for sure you can. You know, how they did it before was without refrigeration freezer. They apparently had salts and other ways. But by the case of the 9 days, it's not something, why rely on bittul, so why rely on eating it if you could just put it in your freezer and wait 9 more days and it's become permitted. It's like a davar sheish lo matirin. But the case of the meat, the case of the cheese, it's never going to become permitted, so therefore, if you don't permit it, you'll have to throw it out. So, again, so if it was real treif, so you throw it out or you give it away. But in a case where this was when it started off beheter, and that's one distinction that comes to my mind, and secondly, I'm just raising a question, this will depend if it's comparable or not, I'm not sure how it worked, historically speaking. So we know, it's not like today I'm telling you a secret, or if I'm telling you a secret, it's because you just didn't learn, but it's not like it's out there. Everyone knows the 9 days you can't eat meat and wine. I'm not springing on you something new today or like a couple of days ago. The question is, I'm not sure. How did it happen with the cheese thing? Did it one day the rabbis woke up and said, you know what, starting tomorrow it's it? Or they said, we'll give you a month, and they're saying, I'm not sure how it worked. So I'm just saying, depending how it worked, would make it more similar. The other part's still not similar, but in terms of, I'm not sure if they had time, did it happen right away or not? So but either way, for many reasons, no one likes the comparison of the chidah, and hence leftovers are prohibited. So, however, I point out like this: if a person the people have to eat meat or chicken for health issues. So, in other words, if you have to have meat or chicken, or if you're gonna have it, even if you can't have it, then number one, I recommend leftovers because at least you have the chidah to rely on. And if you're gonna have, because you have to, whatever the reason, you're better off having chicken than meat, because v'yikr din hagamara, the isser is basar, is real meat, not this fake rabbinic meat we call chicken. So therefore, again, so the accepted psak is not to eat leftovers as well, but someone for health reasons has to, so at least you're better off having both. Having leftover chicken would be your best bet, because leftovers you have the chidah, and chicken it's not midin hagamara. So we'll discuss a little bit about the question of shaving during the 9 days, as well as the 3 weeks. But specifically, the question of shaving will cover Shabbos. What about shaving, let's say Friday, in honor of the Shabbos, in contrast to the shaving for business or other reasons? So there, as always, there are different minhagim. The standard practice is most don't shave from the 3 weeks, and they don't shave on Friday either. However, Rav Soloveitchik's opinion was that he always is looking for halakha categories, and therefore he defined, you can't just have a mix of customs, you have to have defined. So the 3 weeks have a status of Yud Beis Chodesh, of the 12 months. Shloshim has the status, the 9 days, which are starting tonight, have the status of Shloshim, and Tisha B'Av has the status of Shiva. In fact, that's why it's a discussion in the Rishonim about wearing tefillin on Tisha B'Av, because we know in Avel, Yom Rishon doesn't wear tefillin, but the rest of Avelis he does. So the question is, Tisha B'Av, what status does Tisha B'Av have? Which status of Shiva? Does it follow the Shiva of the first days, the rest of Shiva? So that's how he defines them. So therefore, it comes out kulas and chumras. There are, in contrast to, let's say, Rav Moshe Feinstein, we'll just use him, but he's the standard that there is no categories. The 3 weeks took a combination of different things. Some things we took from Yud Beis Chodesh, some things we took from Shloshim. It was a bunch of different things. So, according to Rav Moshe, there's for no reason, meaning for no strong need, there's no reason to shave during the 3 weeks. If you're doing it just for other reasons, but if you're doing it for business, if you need it for work, So Rav Moshe says, of course you can, because he says it's only a minig. The minig of the 3 weeks doesn't overtake the halacha of the mitzvah of making a living. So the Rav Moshe says, if it's going to cause loss of money, you need it for work, then there's no problem of shaving. But according to Rav Soloveitchik, you don't have to come on to that. There is no problem of shaving during the 3 weeks, because it's like Yud Beis Chodesh. Well, what's the halacha? Are you allowed to shave during Yud Beis Chodesh? Let's say someone loses a mother or father. So you could shave after the 30 days are up? So yes and no. Or I should say no and yes. No, you are not allowed to shave during Yud Beis Chodesh until someone tells you you look like a menuvel. Until someone tells you you look disgusting, you need a shave. So, and then there's a further discussion. Do you have to do it once you shave once, that's it? Or do I have to look like a menuvel every time to shave? So the Rabbi Akiva Eiger is lenient. Once you started shaving, you don't have to worry. You can shave every day after that. So, in fact, Rav Soloveitchik's opinion is not only when you're allowed to shave, but you have an obligation to shave. He says a ben Torah has to look well kempt at all times, and therefore if you're permitted to shave, you have to shave. So the story goes over before my day, probably in the 40s, 50s, I don't know, whenever it was, when Rav Soloveitchik was giving share at YU. So I guess it either happened during Sfiras Omer time or happened during the 3 weeks. That would have probably happened in Boston. The boys weren't shaving during Sfira, so apparently Rav Soloveitchik walked over to a couple, one of them, and said, "Oh, you're probably waiting for someone to tell you you look like a menuvel. So now I'm telling you, so it's time for you to shave." So he felt strongly about that. If you can shave, you have to. So Rav Soloveitchik's heter only works until today, because he's saying it has the din of the 3 weeks. It has 3 weeks of the din of Yud Beis Chodesh. But the 9 days has the din of Shloshim. So even Rav Soloveitchik, he'd have to go with Rav Moshe's heter about b'makom parnasa, but it wouldn't be that you could just shave without any special reason. So that would be 3 weeks. Either Rav Moshe says you could shave because of business work, and Rav says you could shave anyway. During the 9 days, you'll have to rely on the heter parnasa, making a living, etc. What about L'Kavod Shabbos, last Shabbos, or what about this coming Shabbos? It's the 9 days, which has the din of Shloshim. It's known as Shabbos Chazon. Are you permitted to shave Shabbos Chazon? Again, someone who doesn't shave all week long, is he permitted to shave? Those opinions who say you can shave all the time, so Shabbos Chazon is not an issue. But if you assume you're not allowed to shave, is there a special heter to shave before Shabbos? So he said last week it was still Yud Beis Chodesh. So according to Rav Soloveitchik, it's a non-issue. And according to Rav Moshe, he's not saying you could shave L'Kavod Shabbos. He's saying you could shave because you're going to work, etc. What about the heter of shaving L'Kavod Shabbos? So somebody asked Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. In fact, there's a sefer the person wrote, Alei Lo Yibo. Basically, he walked around following Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach around, constantly asking him questions. And then he ultimately put it into a sefer. It's not uncommon these days. Anytime he had him, he just wrote it down, he MP3'd it, however he did it. But he was very, very concise in his words. If he wrote, I'm really not 100% what he said. And because some of his questions, he says, he was asked was, when he asked Rav Shlomo Zalman said, how long have you been learning in yeshiva? What kind of ridiculous question? He wrote this about himself, so obviously he was honest. And you like his haskamas, introduction to the sefer, you get haskamas from different rabbis normally. On this haskama, he says, I spoke to the family members, and they told me, do not print this sefer. Rav Shlomo Zalman did not know it was going into print. He was just answering orally. He might have gave you not a different answer, but how you answer questions if you know it's going into print, whatever the issues are. He said, I appreciate it, but I'm printing it anyway. But I'm just saying, so this guy has a lot of credibility. He said everything he's honest about, whether it's good for him or not. So he writes in the sefer, he told Rav Shlomo Zalman, I heard from Rosh Yeshiva Echad, I heard a shir, I heard a psak from one Rosh Yeshiva who we will name later, but he doesn't name him. Rosh Yeshiva Echad, that says one is permitted to shave will cover Shabbos during the 3 weeks, or whatever the case might have been. So we said, and what was his proof? What was his raya? So his raya was, there's a Magen Avram brought down in the laws of the 9 days of Shabbos Chazon, next week is Shabbos Chazon, that the Magen Avram talks about cleaning your clothes will cover Shabbos, because one of the prohibitions also is washing. And so he talks about L'Kavod Shabbos, about washing your clothing. And he says, for haircuts, no, because the Magen Avram's language is, why take a haircut this week? You could have took it last week, the week before, you could take it next week. So therefore, the Magen Avram says you cannot take a haircut L'Kavod Shabbos. So number one is, let me point out, in halachic terms, generally speaking, haircuts and shaving are used interchangeably. Giluach, in other words, they're both treated the same. We don't usually make a distinction between haircuts. There's only a practical difference. Is the reason why you don't take a haircut every day. So usually the custom is you take a haircut before the 3 weeks. Before Tzvir, you don't have to worry. You don't have to take another haircut next week. So practically speaking, there's a difference, but al pi halacha, there's no difference between shaving or haircuts, except that so let me point to, so based on the Magen Avram, there was no, in the time in the Magen Avram, there was no practical difference either. People used to shave every couple of weeks. They used to go to the barber. This is before in the Relko. They used to burn their faces off with the cream or whatever, however they did it, I don't know. And they used to shave. So it wasn't something you did at home by yourself. You used to go to a barber and you had to shave. So the Magen Avram says the reason why you basically can't shave is because why are you shaving now? Why didn't you shave last week or 2 weeks ago? Comes along this Rosh Yeshiva and says, however, that was during the time of the Magen Avram. Bizman Hazeh, we shave daily. So the Magen Avram would agree. It doesn't help me if I shaved yesterday. It doesn't help me to shave today. If I'm taking a haircut yesterday, I don't need another haircut in 3 weeks later. But since I do this daily, so therefore, he wants to say, according to based on the Magen Avram, I'd be permitted to shave L'Kavod Shabbos, even on Shabbos Chazon. That's what the Magen Avram is talking about, Shabbos Chazon. In other words, trimming a beard, that could be something else. I don't know how often people trim beards. Maybe you do it once a week, once every couple of weeks. So then there might not be a heter for that. But someone who is clean shaven and shaves every day, so based on the Magen Avram, one is permitted to shave L'Kavod Shabbos because you couldn't. I can't shave L'Kavod Shabbos yesterday or last week. It's just not going to work. And that's what they said to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. By the way, the Rosh Yeshiva Echad was Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, the son-in-law of Rav Soloveitchik. So he didn't mention who he was, even though Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav Aaron had a very close relationship. Once when Rav Aaron came to Eretz Yisrael, he made him kind of like his Rebbe. He spoke to him all the time, so he probably did know who it was, even though it's not named. And the one who wrote the Sefer was also a student of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, so everyone knew one another. So he says, so Rav Shlomo Zalman writes back, or says back, I understand the logic is very compelling, but I still say the minhag is not to do it. There hasn't been, none of the commentators on the Shulchan Aruch talk about doing it. Shaving L'Kavod Shabbos isn't a new thing. So therefore, the fact that people didn't talk about it, I say not to do it. So the person said back to him, number one is, the Chasam Sofer says it. Yeah, I'm familiar with the Chasam Sofer, okay. And the fact that no one said it, of course no one said it. There was no Nerelko back then. It wasn't a case where, so he says, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not going to protest anyone who does. I'm going to stick to my position. Rav Shlomo Zalman says, if you're asking me, I'll tell you not to shave, but yesh al mi lismach. I'm not going to tell someone who relies on this Rosh Yeshiva, it's very compelling, and I'm not going to tell you you can't, you're just not going to get it from me. That I still don't think so, but I think they say over the name of Rav Gifter that that's not shaving because the halacha says you can't shave, that's the ultimate covered Shabbos, so that's the ultimate. Obviously, depending how you view it, but Rav Shlomo Zalman still was reluctant to say to shave, but he agreed that someone who wants to shave has what to rely on. So that was only one of the reasons this person gave, but Rav Aaron Lichtenstein really had three reasons. Number one was he's following his father-in-law's shita. That number one, but that wouldn't help really Shabbos Chazon because that's already Shloshim. But number one, in the week, 2 weeks before, if there are, that you could shave. You have Rav Soloveitchik is Yud Beis Chodesh. Secondly, he has this Magen Avram, that's only because I could have taken a haircut or a shave last week. But that's only true a couple hundred years ago. Today it's not true. If you shaved yesterday, you still got to shave today. And thirdly, Rav Aaron had a third reason. There's a machlokes rishonim in terms of, in general, we don't make a distinction regarding haircuts and shaving between Shiva and Shloshim as a general rule. So, what about someone who has a mustache and it's getting in the way of the food? The ribs aren't tasting that good because the hair is getting in your mouth or the whatever you're eating, and it's bothering you. Are you permitted to trim your mustache during Shloshim when you're in Shiva? I'm talking about a real Avelis, not just the minhag, but someone lost a loved one and they're in Avelis. Are you allowed to trim your mustache in Shiva and Shloshim? So that's a machlokes rishonim. The Ramban, Nechman, and he says, yes. Look, in order to be able to eat, so one is permitted to trim the mustache even during Shiva. The Ravid says, even during Shloshim, you can't trim your mustache. There's no different Shiva and Shloshim. And you're not allowed to trim your mustache. You got to wait until after Shloshim. And the way it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch is the third opinion, the Ritz Gaius. He says you can't trim your mustache during Shiva, but you can trim it during Shloshim. And the question is, what's the difference? Usually we don't make a distinction between Shiva and Shloshim, so what's the logic? So there's a Ramban in Torah Ta'adam. The Ramban writes, one of the distinctions in general between 7 days, the Shiva and the Shloshim, is he points out there's a big difference between someone not taking a shower at all, especially if they're sitting next to me, but someone doesn't take a shower at all versus someone who can't take a hot shower. Not taking a shower at all is a sar gadol, a sar katzeb. It's definitely a sar depending how often you take showers. But it's not taking a hot shower, at least you're getting clean, kind of, but you're not getting the hana, the enjoyment, the tainug of a hot shower. So he says, the Ritz Gaius says, there's a difference between Shiva and Shloshim. Shiva, the prohibition is also, at least regarding this, is even to be mitzar yourself during Shiva. During Shloshim, it's miyat tanugim. During Shloshim, it's to avoid pleasures, but you don't have to be a mitzar. So the Rambam makes a distinction between, let's say, Shiva, let's say, that you cannot, that perhaps during Shiva not even taking not even taking a shower at all, because that's going to be, because during Shiva you might have to be mitzar yourself, but during Shloshim maybe taking not a hot shower. So therefore comes along Rav Aaron Lichtenstein and says we can make the same distinction here, that a person, like a person who has a beard and you just have to trim it. Okay, so that's just miyat tanugim. That's just, okay, he has a beard anyway, so maybe he doesn't look as well kept as he did before, but it's not going to cause a feel differently. Someone who's used to shaving regularly and you can't shave, that's already a star for different people. They're itchy, they're scratching. So he wants to make a distinction. He says, so since Shabbos Chazon is during Shloshim, is during the 9 days, which Rav Soloveitchik considers Shloshim, so he says, perhaps we can make a distinction not to trim a beard, but someone who shaves regularly, even next Shabbos could shave because that's a sar. So based on three reasons, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein thought that it's permitted to shave with covered Shabbos. Number one, following his father-in-law's opinion in general of breaking it down into the Yud Beis Chodesh Roshim. That really would help us this coming week. Then we have the Diak in the Magen Avram. It's only because you don't shave you don't take a haircut, you don't shave every week. That's why. So why shave this week? You could have shaved last week. But and according to the Ritzkeis, so therefore not to cause SAR. So those are different reasons why he was lenient to shave with covered Shabbos.